I had a plan. I had dreams. I even had a secret savings account for a dream trip around the world that we planned to take in just a few years. I watched my wife, Tracy, blush deeply, and then continue to glow with a rosy hue as she talked to a few colleagues at her company's annual meeting at a small university in the middle of September. At that moment, I stood about 15 steps away from my wife. I paid attention to her reaction, even though she seemed to be talking to a different group of her coworkers. Tracy was talking to Refsirce, whom I had been introduced to earlier as the new English professor in the literature department, and Janet Barnes, who worked in management like Tracy. Considering it was a Christian university, I suspected the other two were not discussing anything obscene. That meant there was only one reason for Tracy's, particularly her evenly flushed complexion. She was sexually aroused. Now I had an answer to a question I had never asked before. When you've been married to someone for 23 years and lived together for 25, you know almost everything about them, even when you don't pay much attention to them, if you're paying attention. At that moment, just 10 minutes ago, I thought I had a perfect marriage with a nearly perfect woman. Now I was piecing together some recent odd behaviors I hadn't noticed as strange until that moment. Tracy and I were best friends, lovers, and parents to two wonderful children. Unlike many couples, we could spend the entire day together and never get tired of each other. We could talk about anything from sex to history, and we had laughed at many aspects of these conversations. I always liked to say that the best way to test compatibility in marriage was to go on a long road trip together, and if you didn't kill each other, you should get married immediately. Tracy and I fit that model in my opinion. Our married life was good. Sure, it had cooled down from our previous passionate days, but it had picked up again when our youngest daughter had left for college the year before. Being childless most of the time for the better part of a year seemed to awaken our desires, and we alternated between slow-burning romance and regular intimacy 3 or 4 times a week. As regulars at the gym, we were both in good physical shape at the age of 45. Tracy had long blonde hair, a generous bust, and a curvaceous figure. Yes, she may have gained about 15 pounds since having children, but she still looked great up to this moment. I am stronger by over 20 pounds than when I left school, and on top of that, I have 25 years of experience in pleasing my wife. Something changed about 2 months ago, and since most of it had changed positively, I wasn't inclined to look a gifted horse in the mouth. I had never thought about it. And while Tracy was always willing and actively engaged in our love life, she rarely initiated it. Suddenly, she started initiating it as much as I did, and our physical connection went well beyond the average. However, we no longer made love. It was only sexual relations. That was great, but our focus had shifted. I didn't ask myself this question at the time, but looking back, I understand that it was a mistake. Except when I interacted with her, Tracy and Rafa were never more than 5 feet apart when walking. Now, knowing what I was looking at, I could determine that Tracy's glow intensified every time she was near Rafe, even when I was around. Usually, this quickly disappeared when I showed up, but right after Tracy left me, she had a companion to chat with. I discreetly observed this couple throughout the event, although I didn't have to try very hard. Tracy seemed to forget everyone around her when Rafe was near. I never saw her looking around for her husband throughout the evening. She always ensured light physical contact with Rafa whenever the opportunity arose. My emotions initially ranged from concern and fear, then to complete anger as I convinced myself of the truth of what I was seeing. What I was seeing truly seemed like the end of my marriage. I had to physically pull my wife away from Rafi at around 11 p.m. She didn't look happy when I appeared and told her it was time to go home. The look of anger in her eyes only lasted for a moment. Then she backed off, but not fast enough for me not to notice the way she looked at him. After 23 years of marriage, the evening conversation on the way home usually flowed freely, but I deliberately stayed silent, waiting for Tracy to start. She seemed preoccupied for a while, staring out the window next to the front seat until she realized the silence was lingering, And then she quickly filled the void with some meaningless chatter about the university president's grandmother wearing proper attire. I didn't react much. "Oh, I'm really tired. I'm going to bed," Tracy said when we got home. "You're walking." I wasn't sure if she was just trying to avoid the evening conversation, or if she was trying to lead me to bed to deal with disappointment from the event. Either way, I wasn't enthusiastic and told her I would watch TV. I thought she looked disappointed. The next day was Saturday, so I had the whole day to spend outdoors working in the garden, which gave me enough time to calm down and reflect. If Tracy had any notion that things weren't as simple in our world, she did an excellent job of not showing it. Over the next week at home, things seemed a bit tenser. I tried to stay calm on my part, but I used the Find My Phone app on my iPhone about 6 times a day, and in each case, Tracy was where she should be, so to speak. In the evenings, she seemed more ready than ever to be intimate with me. She was more reserved on the first night, but then she returned to her usual behavior. As usual, I made sure to satisfy her, giving her intense pleasure. On the next Monday, nothing changed, but on Tuesday the Find My Phone app showed me that Tracy had come home at noon. 15 minutes later, I silently entered the house and confirmed that my marriage had ended. They weren't silent in our bedroom, so I didn't need to go upstairs to confirm that Tracy's partner was indeed Ref. Oh, dear, Ref. At some point, in the midst of their celebration, Tracy exclaimed, "Oh my God, my love, you're the best." The final sentence truly broke my heart. I had to restrain all my emotions from running into the bedroom and killing him. However, I didn't go into the room because I knew that if I started hitting him, I wouldn't stop until I killed him. None of them deserved me going to jail. Tracy, I fully realized that she seemed to think she was everything to me, the one I loved more than anything in the world. But that was the honest truth. I had loved her for most of my life, been married to her for 23 years, and had 2 wonderful children. She was my best friend, my soulmate, and an amazing sexual partner. We had talked about everything, laughed a lot. Good up until recently, I had no intention of having an affair. When I met Ray Cersei, everything suddenly changed. Somehow, he walked into the management building a few days before school started, and needless to say, my life changed from then on. Ray was 30 years old, 6'2", incredibly fit, with short brown hair and soft gray eyes. He was handsome, but he wasn't George Clooney. I knew that the longer it dragged on, the higher the chances of getting caught. Mike had been my rock for the past 25 years. We had been married for 23 years and had 2 wonderful children. He was my best friend, soulmate, and an amazing sexual partner. We talked about everything. I had laughed a lot, up until recently. I had never intended to have an affair. When I met Ray Cersei for some reason, he walked into the administration building a few days before school started, and without boasting, my life truly changed from then on. Ray was 30 years old, 6'2", incredibly fit, with short brown hair and soft gray eyes. He was handsome, but he couldn't compare to George Clooney. I didn't work for the rest of that day because I couldn't get Rafe out of my mind. When I got home, I made sure that I almost killed Mike with intimacy. I knew Mike fell asleep exhausted, with a happy smile on his face. I would never tell him that when we were intimate, I wasn't thinking about him. I continued the relationship with Mike until he became despondent over the next 2 weeks, and then my loving husband opened the door for me, as he had to leave town one night. In the following days, on Wednesday, I knew it was wrong, but I was almost trembling when I called Rafe on Monday morning and invited him for lunch on Wednesday afternoon. I had checked Rafe's schedule beforehand, knowing he didn't have classes on Wednesday afternoons, and I had taken the day off from my administrative job. Rafe met me at a small Italian restaurant, and we had a great lunch, talking and laughing a lot. I knew I laughed a lot and struggled not to place my hand on his arm and hand as we talked. I blushed a lot and felt like a teenager on a first date. Rafe and I hadn't discussed sex yet, but he also knew what the expectations were. He laughed a lot, and held my hand for a while, even laughing several times. I knew he felt the same connection as I did. Being the older gentleman, Rafe paid the bill and then asked quietly, "Where do we go from here?" I lived just 10 minutes away and had parked my car there, so I would drive. I replied with more confidence than I actually felt, knowing that Mike wouldn't be home until Thursday night, which helped ease the anxiety about the impending event. But I had to admit that I felt anxious. I knew that after having 2 kids and crossing the age of 45, I no longer had the mature physique that Rafe might be used to. I loved Mike with all my heart and soul, but my time with Rafa was unfolding, and I didn't want to deny myself that pleasure. I didn't feel guilty about it. I drove into the garage and closed the door. The next 10 hours were some of the best moments in my life. Rafe clearly felt the same connection as I did, and everything we did was wonderful. I wasn't a virgin when I met Mike, but I always saw him as an amazing sexual partner. Raf had completely changed everything, and everything we did was incredible. When Rafe finally called an Uber to get his car, I felt like a spineless jellyfish and as dumb as a piece of seaweed. I remember there were a lot of screams and some crying, and I'm pretty sure that came from me, but I really can't say for certain. Actually, I can't vouch for my own name. Now I knew I had experienced the feeling of being swept away. I really wanted this. "Tracy, you're an amazing woman," Rafe said. Perhaps that was one of the best sexual experiences I've had in my life. Rafe, I knew exactly what Tracy McGowan meant when she called me. I had seen her reaction when we met 2 weeks ago at the office building. I knew we would have sex after lunch. Although I didn't directly say it, this woman was definitely a MILF. Mother I'd like to fuck. Beautiful face, large breasts, and long blonde hair. She might have been a bit overweight, but I wouldn't give that up for anything. I noticed the rings on her fingers when I first met her, but I knew that didn't necessarily mean she was off the market. Married women often had more experience, and their quirks tended to make them more exciting. We had an amazing lunch, and then she took me to her place to spend most of the day in physical ecstasy on the marital bed. Clearly, her husband was away on a business trip, so instead of just having sex during lunch, we had sex all day long. It turned out she was the most physically responsive woman I had ever known. When Uber took me back to my car in the restaurant parking lot, I hoped there would be many more days like this. In fact, there would be many more days like this. Mike, I was shocked to discover the extent of Tracy's deception. In the following week, she continued to play the ideal wife, while I quietly prepared for the impending divorce. I met with a lawyer on Wednesday morning, and she told me that Tracy would be served on Wednesday morning. Even though we lived in a no-fault divorce state, I was still filing based on her infidelity, which seemed minor, I knew. I didn't understand why I pushed my wife into another man's arms like this, or maybe it was because he was about 15 years younger than me. Either way, it wasn't just a one-time passionate sexual affair, and as I needed further confirmation, the Find My Phone app showed that Tracy had come home for lunch 3 times in the past 10 days. I knew I didn't need to go home to understand that Tracy wasn't there for a cheese sandwich. I smirked to myself thinking about it. At some point during that time, I went to our snack bar to grab a pack of cinnamon and brown sugar Pop-Tarts and found nothing. The day before, I had almost finished a pack, and I knew there was another pack left. I also knew that Tracy didn't eat them because she hated Pop-Tarts. So, not only was Rafe having sex with my wife, but he was also stealing my snacks. Shameful, Tracy. I woke up on Thursday morning, feeling like $1 million after the most incredible night of sex in my life. In theory, I should have felt guilty, but in reality, I just wanted more of it. I waited until noon before calling Rafe. My husband won't be back until 9 o'clock. If you come over right after that, I'm free from 5 o'clock onwards, and we have time for 1 or maybe 2 rounds. Perhaps 2, I said cheerfully. Drive your car into the garage. I like a woman who knows what she wants, Rafe replied. We expressed our passionate love slowly in the first round, And the second round was even more intense. It was as amazing as the day before. Rafe left around 7:30, and I quickly changed the sheets and put fresh ones on the bed for the second time in 2 days. I made sure to put both sets of sheets at the bottom of the basket. I felt so good after taking a shower for 90 minutes. Mike walked in the door, and my timeless space with him ended, and I hugged my husband tightly. I genuinely loved this man, though I admitted feeling a bit guilty as Mike practically pulled me into the bedroom to enjoy sex. It was the first time in my life that I had sex with 2 different men in the same day. To be honest, it was quite appealing to me. "That was amazing, Mike," I whispered as we lay together after our second connection that evening. I genuinely meant it. Mike was also an excellent lover in his own way. However, the way I connected with Rafe surpassed any compliments. We were almost doing something completely different from what Mike and I were doing. I couldn't feel guilty for experiencing something amazing in my mind. Sex with Rafe was a separate part of my life from my husband. Sex with Mike was emotional, while sex with Rafe was about incredible physical states. We did this twice a week. I knew it couldn't last forever, but I would enjoy it while I could. "Mike, I know Tracy will be served divorce papers at 10:00 a.m. on Wednesday." 2 minutes went by before my phone rang. "No, Mike, I don't want a divorce," she shouted over the phone as I answered. "And I don't want a cheating wife. But we don't always get what we want, do we?" I replied. "I can explain," Tracy said, crying. "I made a decision for myself. A decision we need to discuss." Tracy cried, "Because you broke our vows. I've also made a decision for myself, so there's no need to talk about your decision," I said, ending the conversation. I could function effectively at work, but unfortunately, I knew I would have to face something when I got home, and Tracy didn't disappoint. "Maybe you should have talked to me before filing for divorce," Tracy shouted at me as I walked in. "What are you talking about? We've been married for 23 years. What's going on?" "Those 23 years seem to mean nothing to you when you keep cheating," I replied. I could see from Tracy's eyes and the smudged makeup on her face that she had been crying. I didn't feel happy at all. "I love you, Mike, truly. What I have with Rafe is just physical. It's a decision for myself," she said. I cut her off. Tracy looked concerned, to say the least. "I'm sorry for hurting you, but I think you're overreacting." "Can't we talk about this?" I asked. "I don't understand what you're saying, Tracy. You've cheated multiple times, maybe more than I know," I said. "I know it doesn't look good. I know it's just a decision for you," I repeated. "Tracy, why don't you explain it to me?" I thought that was clearly me feigning sarcasm, but Tracy seemed encouraged by my reaction and even chuckled. "I can't explain it, but it's like we have some kind of special physical connection. Wasn't this the best time you've ever had?" I heard her say with her eyes widened strangely, and for the first time, she looked scared. "Did you hear that?" she asked, tears and fear coexisting in her voice. "Do you want me to repeat it for you?" "I was home last week. You were just too busy to hear me." "At least I can't undo this mistake," she said with precision, looking down at the ground in shame. "It was just physical, Mike. I love you. I can't express my love for you. Can we at least try counseling? I know I've hurt you, but I know you still love me." She got it right on the last part, and it hurt the most. I still loved her, though not as much as 2 weeks ago. 25 years of loving someone couldn't just vanish in an instant. "Tracy, although I knew what I was doing was risky, I was still shocked when I was served with divorce papers at the office on Wednesday afternoon. I had no idea that Mike knew about my affair. God, not only did he know, but it seemed he had caught Rafe and me in bed together once again. And worse, he had video evidence of that. What's even worse is that he heard me tell Rafe that he was the best I'd ever had. Damn it, I knew I wouldn't be able to explain the affair, Rafe, and I shared to my husband in a reasonable way. But I knew Mike's love for me would eventually prevail. I would start by trying to persuade Mike to allow me to continue the relationship with Rafe as an outsider and return to our marriage. And if there was no other option, I proposed seeking a therapist, and he agreed. The first session with the therapist didn't go well for me. The therapist was a woman, but like Mike, she couldn't seem to understand that I couldn't resist my attraction to Raf. I guess I expected her to be more empathetic, maybe stand on my side. "Your vows don't mean anything to you, Mrs. McGowan?" the counselor asked after I finished my story. "No, they mean everything to me. But this is different," I explained. "It's different from anything I've ever experienced before." "You're a woman. You've felt arousal before, right?" "Well, it's like that. Just stronger, like I've been electrified," I said. I could see from her face that she didn't believe me. Mike was also giving me a skeptical look. Men are often accused of thinking with their little head, but women commit the same offense if you look at divorce statistics these days, the counselor said calmly. Yes, the wandering eye phenomenon may be correct, but most people understand that they have a choice to ignore it. "You chose to give in to your primal desire," she said matter-of-factly. I couldn't believe that this woman was making such a negative statement, basically implying that I couldn't control myself. This was almost equivalent to calling me a prostitute. Then, she asked me a question that probably solidified my decision to divorce. "If Mike could forgive you and continue living with you, do you think you could control your physical desires and remain faithful to your husband?" Oh my God, I thought this woman would be supportive. I just stood there, afraid to even answer that question. Mike would know I was lying through the truth sensor. "I love you, Mike. Please work with me on this. I don't love this, but I have to have it. This is the best time of my life. Please don't ask me to give it up." I cried a lot after the conversation ended. I quickly looked at Mike, hoping to see signs that his resolve was weakening. Finally, he admitted that he still loved me. I saw a lifeless look in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Tracy. I truly love you, but I won't allow you the right to have an affair with me. And I can't forgive what you've done. I'm sorry for not being enough of a man for you." "You're enough of a man for me," Mike said. "I love you, Mike." I said. "I don't love him. I'll give it up if that helps us stay together. Please don't give up on us." "I'm not doing this. You abandoned us the first time you had sex with him," he replied. "Don't blame me. In the end, it's all about you, and you don't love me as much as I love you." 2 weeks after my last meeting with the counselor, I was in bed with Raphael. I didn't know if Mike was watching me or not, but at that moment I didn't care. I had met Raphael at the office the day before and called him when I got back. He was more than willing to come over for lunch. Yes, the sex was amazing. The divorce was finalized after 6 months. During this time, Raphael and I had been intimate dozens of times, and the sex was always incredible. He was my weakness. I loved Mike, but I desired Raphael. I had to have him. I knew I would never get Mike back because of this. He didn't love me enough to let me have Raphael. "Mike, I can't believe that Tracy is actually trying to persuade me to let her leave her lover and still maintain our marriage. If you truly love me, this is absurd. Don't forget, there's no way we're still married. I may not understand a woman who has had an affair and is begging for forgiveness. According to our decision, we've separated, and it's time for property division. I might have been a fool, but I won't be a fool." I was really surprised when I saw that the counselor we hired wasn't living in the same dream world as Tracy. She actually called my wife a prostitute in our first counseling session and didn't get any better from there. She ended our session after the 4th counseling session by telling my wife that I wouldn't change my mind, and she supported me. I think Tracy was shocked when the counselor advised her to stop the session. I don't know if Tracy asked my daughter to stand up for her or not, but both of them tried their best. "Daddy is ruining the family, Daddy." My youngest daughter cried when I told her this. "No, sweetheart, Daddy isn't ruining the family. Mommy did that. Daddy is just making it legal," I said. The little girl furrowed her brow, and from the corner of my eye, I could see she was thinking hard. "Maybe you're right, Daddy," the little girl finally said. As for me, I really didn't want to ruin Tracy's marriage, but I saw it more as her husband's issue. I knew she truly loved this man, but we had an incredible physical connection, almost from another world. If she wanted me, then I would certainly comply. I couldn't blame him for not wanting to be betrayed. But again, that was between him and Tracy. My job wasn't to wonder why. After Mike filed for divorce, Tracy stayed away from me for 2 weeks. When he didn't stay and didn't continue with her, we resumed our relationship. In fact, everything was even better because when Mike left, I had all of her physical attention. I have to admit that my relationship with Tracy was the best I had ever had. Although Tracy was skilled in bed, I never thought we would last in the long run. At 45, she wasn't the right woman for marriage. I knew I wanted to have my own child, and she already had 2 grown children. Moreover, if she could do what she did with the person she claimed to love most in the world, what could I expect? I continued my search for the last woman, even though I didn't tell Tracy about it. She had to face many difficulties after losing Mike. Everything changed when I found Lucy Ralston, about a year after Tracy's divorce. She was 24, had short brown hair, a dancer's slender body, and we hit it off from our first meeting. I didn't tell Tracy about Lucy at first, but I eventually confessed after about 2 months. I knew I had hurt Tracy's feelings, but it seemed like Tracy didn't really love me. We were completely connected physically, but emotionally, we were just good friends. When Lucy and I decided to give in, I had to tell Tracy that everything was over between us. "But I left my husband for you," Tracy cried when I told her. "No, you left your husband to sleep with me. We never existed. It was just about incredible sex, and that was your choice. But it wasn't my choice. My choice is to have a wife and a family." As I said, "Tracy, I was hurt when Rafe told me he would be exclusive with Lucy and wouldn't have a sexual relationship with me anymore. But I left my husband for you," I cried when he told me. Rafe gave me a look that I could only interpret as pity. "No, that's not right. You left your husband to have a sexual relationship with me," he corrected. I knew he was speaking the truth, but it was still difficult at the time. When my children found out about this, Mike didn't mince words and bluntly stated that their mother had cheated several times just for the best sex of her life. My children weren't happy with me, but they eventually accepted it. I admit I wasn't fully on board with how things were developing in my life. When the kids came home for Christmas, my eldest daughter casually asked if they would be meeting Mom's boyfriend. That's when I admitted that we were no longer together. "So, you gave up a century-long love with Dad just for a few years of great sex with a younger guy, right?" "Oh, sorry, I forgot. A few years of the best sex of your life," my daughter teased. I couldn't say much. I could only look down at the floor. Losing Rafe didn't affect me as much as losing Mike did. I mean, Rafe was a fantastic sexual partner, but Mike was my soul, my everything. Returning to an empty apartment every day after work was heartbreaking, but at least I could look forward to great sex a few times a week. When Rafe left, I had nothing left, and the loneliness became unbearable. So I guess I was somewhat eager to start dating again. I was surprised that most of the men I was interested in were in their 30s and some even in their 20s. Perhaps older women like me didn't look too bad, even at 47. I enjoyed the company of many men, even though none of them came close to the quality of my former lover. Perhaps it was because I hadn't dated in so long. But I was sure that men's expectations had changed over the course of the past century, especially when it came to younger guys. They seemed to expect sexual relations right from the first date, and if that didn't happen, there usually wasn't a second date. This wasn't strange to me, but I also didn't want to jump into bed with just anyone. When sexual relations did occur, from my perspective, my partners were usually very considerate, and everyone was satisfied. Younger men, in particular, seemed to appreciate my ample bosom, while older men appeared to enjoy oral sex more. Most sexual encounters were just that, sexual encounters. However, I guessed I hadn't dated someone long enough to create a real sense of love. I truly missed that feeling. When talking to my children, I delicately inquired about Mike. I didn't think he was dating anyone, which meant I might have a chance to reconnect with him. I knew the chances of success were not very high, but why wouldn't he date me if he was considering dating other divorced women? We had a wonderful marriage for 23 years. Nevertheless, I knew if this were to happen, I would have to take the initiative. "Mike, perhaps you'd like to have coffee with me sometime," I said after he answered my call a few months later. "I know I hurt you with what I did, and I'm sorry for that. But I really want us to be friends, close friends, who sit down and have coffee together, and maybe even eat together sometimes. I really missed the times when I sat with you and talked." "Yeah, Tracy, I think we can do that," he replied cautiously. "I really miss your presence, and I think I'm in a better place now than before." We arranged our coffee date for the following Saturday. Mike, I have to admit that Tracy looked absolutely stunning when she walked into the Starbucks where we had agreed to meet. I hadn't seen her in 2 years, and time hadn't taken a toll on her at all. She didn't look any older, and her weight seemed to be the same as the last time I saw her. She had short hair that reached her shoulders, and the snug sweater she wore really highlighted her ample bust. She wore minimal makeup, which only emphasized that she was a beautiful woman. I stood up to greet her and stood there not knowing whether to hug her or not. She answered that question for me by stepping into my space, gently kissing my cheek, and hugging me. I embraced her and asked, "How is it that no one has swept you off your feet?" A natural question that made her blush sweetly. "Well, not everyone has such good taste," she replied with a smile on her lips. We ordered our coffee, and each of us got a pastry. We talked about various topics, much like when we were still married. The conversation was enjoyable, to the point that we both had a second cup of coffee, even though it had more caffeine than usual at Starbucks. "It's been really nice, Tracy," I said as we stood up to leave. "How about we have lunch together next time?" I think I surprised her with this invitation, as her eyes widened when she looked at me. "Sure, that would be great," she replied softly. I called her 2 weeks later and arranged a lunch date. It had been over 25 years since I had gone on a date with anyone. I hadn't dated anyone at all, especially after divorcing Tracy. Despite the pain I felt from what Tracy had done to me, I tried to pretend not to care in front of everyone. However, the reality was that it had torn my heart apart, and after the divorce, I distanced myself from all women. One Saturday afternoon, Tracy and I had a very pleasant lunch at our favorite Italian restaurant. I knew she hoped I would invite her over to my place after dinner, but I only walked her to her car and gave her a friendly kiss on the cheek before heading to my car. Over the next year, we frequently had dinner together. I didn't want to push things further because it gave me more control over the situation. In my view, dinner led to what happened after dinner, and then what happened next. I didn't want and couldn't approach that. "Mike, maybe you've become wiser over the years." I knew he enjoyed the time we spent together, but he had never invited me out. I thought that one day he would decide to do so, and that would be a small step towards me having a chance to get back with him. But he had never given that opportunity. Eating at a restaurant can't set the stage for sharing a bed together. I understood that and decided to date someone else once again. I guess I had to accept this. Mike, Tracy had me so messed up that I hadn't actually dated another woman in 5 years. I certainly didn't consider those lunches with Tracy as dates, even though I knew she was expecting something. I was at my favorite liquor store, perusing the available tequila options, looking for something new when I felt someone to my right. It seemed like she was doing something similar to me. She seemed friendly enough, so I decided she might need my deep knowledge of tequila. I was just trying to be friendly. "Would you like some tequila, or should I make a cocktail for you?" I asked with a smile. "I never dilute good tequila," she replied. "I drink tequila like I drink coffee, straight. No mixers." I hardly know any women who drink tequila properly. I turned to a woman for the first time. "Really drink tequila and look stunning. You're not wearing a ring on your left hand anymore." She seemed slightly younger than me, with dark brown, almost curly hair that fell to her shoulders. Her skin was fairer, and her eyes were a bright blue. I guessed she might have some Irish blood like me. I didn't realize I was staring at her until I heard her speak, and then realized she was asking me a question. Surprised, she gave me a sidelong glance. "So, did you just call me ma'am?" she asked incredulously. "Do I look like your mom?" "Sorry about that. It's a graduation issue. My parents are both to blame." "But no, you don't look like my mom. I love my mom to death. But even on her best days, she doesn't look as good as you." I couldn't believe I had just said that, and chuckled. Then that look of surprise turned into a mischievous smile. Now I had a clearer view of the fit physique of a woman her age. So why was Loserville's tequila expert, if we want to be polite, having any trouble getting at least one date? "I haven't dated in 5 years, since I divorced my deceitful wife," I whispered. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," she replied, looking somewhat embarrassed. There was an awkward silence for a moment. I didn't have enough tricks to break the deadlock, but luckily it seemed to pass on its own. "So, what do you suggest?" she asked, turning back to the tequila bottle. "I really like Don Julio Blanco, and I also like Guy Fieri's new guy, Sammy Hager Santo Tequila. But if it's a really special occasion, then go for Don Julio 1942. It's expensive but truly amazing," I replied. "How much is a bottle?" "It's $85, I answered. She nodded, seemingly ending the conversation. I picked up a bottle of Santo from the shelf, and then thought, "Oh well, why not?" and raised my hand. "Mike McGowan, would you like to try tequila with me?" "I'll pay," I said, presenting my most sincere face. She smiled mischievously, looked me up and down, and then accepted my invitation. We headed to a nearby bar and spent the next 2 hours sampling tequila. I also made sure to order some appetizers for us. When we left the bar, I had her phone number. I couldn't begin to interpret what was going on in my head over the next week. I was thrilled to have the phone number of a beautiful woman, but that also meant I had to call her and arrange a date. The last time I dated was just before the American Revolution. Oh my, I thought, maybe I could take her to a restaurant. Perhaps I could find a roller skating rink or a bowling alley. My head was spinning. I had a great job and made a lot of money. Most people seemed to like me. I knew about current events and never discussed politics on a date. I realized I was sweating profusely. I realized that some things hadn't changed when it came to dating. Women had the upper hand, and they knew it. However, she gave me her phone number without me having to pull teeth, which I guess counted as a point for me, right? The debate in my mind went on for days, and might have lasted longer if fate hadn't intervened. Fate took the form of Anna Shortino, whom I stumbled upon in the hallway of my office. I was trying to decide what to do with Rose when I bumped into Anna. She stumbled in her 3-inch high heels, and I grabbed her arm to prevent her from falling. I apologized and said, "I know I'm not that big, but I don't think you would have noticed that if I hadn't accidentally bumped into you. If you hadn't bumped into me, I would have been here anyway," Anna said after I had soothed her. Anna was probably the same age as my youngest daughter. Occasionally, we would chat, and I would give her some fatherly advice on various matters. She also served as my personal advisor on issues related to the younger generation. If I needed an explanation about something related to a different generation that I didn't want to bother my kids with, I would seek out Anna, and she would explain it to me in a way my 50-year-old brain could understand. "Well, actually," I mumbled, perhaps sounding a bit vulnerable. Anna looked into my face, as if trying to read the signs. She suddenly smirked. I felt uncomfortable with this teasing, but still knew Anna was right. I also knew she genuinely cared and was kind to me. "So how long has it been since she gave you her phone number?" "This month or this year?" Anna asked. 5 days ago, Anna, and if you keep being so smart, I might have to hit you," I warned half-jokingly. "Oh, maybe we both might like that," she replied with excitement. I blushed for real. "Seriously, Mike, what's the issue?" You're not an ugly guy. You still have plenty of opportunities. Call her. Anna spent the next half hour telling me about some things she and her friends did on their dates. I didn't bother to activate my sudden note-taking mode to record what she was saying. Do you know how to dance? She asked after a while. Anyone with 3 left feet would have a better shot than me. Then I'll take that as a no, I replied. You know, women like it when a man asks them to dance. It's a physical activity that can stimulate the process, she said with a radiant smile on her lips. That's right. It's true. Seriously, Mike, what's the problem? I always thought it was an urban legend. I stated with 100% certainty that it was like preparing for sex. La la la, I said, covering my ears as she looked at me with a knowing look, then chuckled. Oh, and don't forget to bring a condom. You can never be too prepared, she said, looking straight into my eyes. Yes, Mom, I replied sarcastically. That evening, after getting home, I called Rose and arranged a date for the following Saturday. Anna told me not to dwell too much on my previous marriage, but to answer any questions Rose might ask honestly. I felt awkward having to share what had happened with someone I barely knew, but Rose was very understanding. She then shared her own breakup story, which included a 15-year marriage ending with her catching her husband in bed with a neighbor. Tracy, the very real pain I felt from the minor STD I contracted paled in comparison to the humiliation I went through in the doctor's office. Don't get me wrong. The doctor and the 2 nurses I encountered were entirely professional, but I could sense the pressure they were under in dealing with me. It didn't help that I listed 6 different recent sexual partners for notification. Wow, 6 notifications, I heard one nurse whisper to another after they first reviewed my test results. It's a good thing she's not under 25 anymore, I heard another nurse whisper to a colleague after they first reviewed my test results. I probably would have torn her apart if she said that out loud in public, but I had to admit to myself that the comment sounded pretty awful. I didn't dwell on it much, but I did make good use of my singlehood in recent years. When Rafe left me after Mike divorced me, I probably went a little crazy. I thought maybe I was looking for someone to replace Mike and Ref, but if that was the case, nothing remotely similar had come along. How could I replace what Mike and I had for 23 years, and how could I replace the fantastic sexual relationship I had with Ref? I don't know. Perhaps in my mind, I was compensating for quality with quantity. I had never really thought about how many people I had slept with until I had to report that number and list my partners. No doubt, having sex with most of my partners without protection was foolish and irresponsible. It's not like I was blackout drunk and unaware of what I was doing. I always chose clean-cut, decently cared-for guys. But that's a different story. When you have sex with someone, you're also having sex with all the people they've recently had sex with. I was just ignorant, truly foolish. At least I didn't have to tell anyone about it. Mike and Rose got married about a year after their first date. They still had some trust issues, but we worked through them with love and the help of an excellent counselor. I gently pushed Rose away, and we lay on our sides, facing each other, both breathing heavily from our efforts. After 25 years of marriage, when we were both 75 years old, having sex once a week was enough. We spent an extra 10 minutes kissing and cuddling before falling asleep. To say that Rose saved me would be an understatement. After divorcing Tracy, I was lost, not even sure how to date. She allowed me to take it step by step, sometimes even by practical demonstration, and we grew together, though I hadn't bet on it. I found a companion to grow old with, Tracy. I was a bit more cautious when choosing a partner after I re-entered the dating scene following my issues. This was partly due to menopause, and perhaps because even though I still looked decent as I hit my 50s, those in their 20s and 30s no longer paid attention to me. In fact, because there are more single women than men in the 40 to 50 age group, the competition in these age brackets has become quite fierce. If someone had asked me a few years ago, I would have told them it was a done deal. I would grow old with my loving husband, Mike, because I was a fool. But nothing went as planned. I had overestimated my worth to Mike. I confused his compassion with weakness. I thought he loved me enough to at least forgive me for my transgressions. A few years ago, I moved to a senior community. My old house was too big for me alone. I would see my children and grandchildren every few months. It took many years for my relationship with my children to return to normal. My relationship with Mike remained amicable, though we stopped having lunch together when I realized these lunches wouldn't bring me any closer to him. Eventually, Mike started dating again after years of living in seclusion. I admit I was jealous of the way he looked at Rose when the whole family gathered for holidays. I couldn't help but notice the adoring looks and sweet gestures they exchanged. It made me nauseous. Did I deserve that? I asked myself. I never liked the answer.